Hello there, we are your election headquarters, and what a pleasure to be with you tonight on PM Express, where President-elect John Dramani Mahama is just a step away from officially taking over as the next president of the Republic of Ghana. But that would not happen without a political transition. Quite a number of activities happening at the start of today, where, of course, officially the presidential transition team has been inaugurated. A number of activities starting off the day with the former president, now president-elect John Dramani Mahama, meeting with President Akufo-Addo today at the Jubilee House. That process culminated in the inauguration of the transition team, which was inaugurated by President Akufo-Addo. And there you have on your screens now what transpired earlier today when John Mahama paid a visit to Jubilee House after more than 7 years of leaving office. And we now know that, of course, this will mark the beginning of a new journey for John Dramani Mahama, the president-elect, who has now announced a new team that will be working with the government transition team as they work towards inauguration on January 7. So let's get to it by telling you about members who are working on the John Mahama side in terms of the political transition, by giving you a sense of those who are doing that. The lead on that team is Julius Debra, as you see on the screens there, co-chairperson of that very transition team that has been inaugurated today. We have the chairperson of the National Democratic Congress, Johnson Asiedu Nketia, who's now serving, interestingly, as a member of the transition team. Then there is also the chief scribe of the National Democratic Congress, the secretary of the NDC, Fifi Fiavikwete. And I must say that these two individuals, Julius Debra and Fifi Fiavikwete, had served in the erstwhile NDC administration, except for Johnson Asiedu Nketia, who's remained at the echelons of the National Democratic Congress, serving as the former Secretary General, or Secretary, I should say, of the National Democratic Congress, and now as the chairperson of the party. But interestingly, John Dramani Mahama is making him a part of the transition team. As to why that is happening, we'll be finding out for you shortly. But some interesting names also featuring on this team for you. Dr. Kesela Tofoseng, as we all know him, a leading member of the NDC, but also, interestingly, at some point moved from being member of parliament to being leader of the NDC group in parliament. Now he is officially being confirmed as a member of the transition team in the John Mahama camp. And it's interesting to know that he's also been accompanied by another colleague MP for Boku, one of the Boku areas, Boku Central, I should say, Mahama Yaraga, who is also featuring in that team as well. A refreshing name here is Guzi Tano. Of course, everyone knows the story of Guzi Tano, but if you do not know about that, he's been an interesting figure within the NDC. At some point, exited the party, but is now made amends and has featured on the top team leading the transition for John Dramani Mahama, and is featuring here as a member, a key member of the John Mahama transition squad, I should say. Callistus Mahama, PhD, of course, is also in there. He's secretary to the transition team, who will now be playing a very crucial role, coordinating affairs on the concerns and the issues that the NDC campaign will have towards the transition period. So he will be a very key individual, playing a crucial role as coordinating all of the paperwork for the NDC as they interact with the likes of the Attorney General, other ministers of state, as we work through this very last few days of the Akufo-Addo era. The former presidential staffer is also here, Dr. Valerie Sawyer, who's also once more making it onto this list. Some say, well, it's not a surprise, given the fact that she's been with John Mahama, just as Julius Debra, all throughout the campaign. So some of these names are very much expected, except for this legend, Professor Kwame Ahoy, who's also been named by John Mahama, quite an experienced hand in terms of, the crafting of our fourth democratic dispensation. So Professor Kwame Ahoy is also coming in strong, featuring on that team that John Mahama has nominated to be part of the inaugurated presidential transition team. But that's not all, because there's one last member, but not the list, Dr. Omani Bwama, who many are attributing the electoral success of the NDC to. He is now coming in really, really strong now as a member of the transition team. He was director of IT for the NDC, led quite a speedy coalition process for the NDC. But of course, changes are happening. We are in transition, and possibly why John Mahama might be featuring him in this very crucial role of playing a role when it comes to transition. But then, per the act that governs the transition team, there's supposed to be an eminent person who would have to serve on the advisory council, a reason for which we're seeing the return of this face. Very popular during the erstwhile NDC administration. He served as former speaker. He was then Speaker of Parliament. Edward Doa Jaho has been nominated as well. And of course, he's been inaugurated by President Akufo-Addo today. So he's a member officially of the transition team for the NDC side. We'll get to the governing side shortly. But the reason why we're exposing what the NDC is doing is because these names are key. They would, of course, be tabling all of their concerns as far as the handing over notes are concerned. What's coming in from the president, where he's leaving us off, and possibly what this team would want to do going into the future. But what's the function of the transition team? Let's get to the article governing that, because that's crucial for all of us. And we have the Presidential Transition Act, because this is the framework around which John Mahama is doing what he's doing today, which is days of officially taking over on January 7 when we cross over into the new year. But there's a need for you to know about what's happening now. This is clearly, the outlook of the team. But we need to get to Article 2 of this because that's a very crucial part of it. We know that obviously there should be co-chairs with Julius Deborah and of course the other government functionaries are doing, but the functions are key. You need to pay attention to that. Take a look at what just went by in terms of the functions, because that's very crucial. The functions of the presidential transition team is very crucial. It's written here in Article 2 of the Transition Act. It talks about the fact that, first of all, this group of people comprising of the governing side and that of the National Democratic Congress, they would have to make a comprehensive, practical arrangement to regulate, in accordance with the Act, the transfer of political power following a presidential election and also the general election as well. There's also the point about ensuring the provision of daily national security briefings, which the president did earlier today through that interaction that you saw earlier between the president and the president-elect. So daily, that will be happening. And we know as well that another key function, the reason for which I want to draw your attention to the function of the transition team, has got to do with point C. The transition team would have to ensure that salaries, allowances, facilities and privileges, and also the retiring benefits or awards determined by the president, determined by Parliament, are paid without any quote undue delay. But there's a big question there for the NDC, because this is a party that promised that it will not be paying the ex-gratia to members of Parliament and Article 71 holders. So that's a big test for this team working on the transition team. Will they make the payments? Will they honor the obligations as stipulated within law? And even as we speak, there are some red flags from the side of the NDC. They believe that some amounts of money is being released now by the government, which they are questioning. So all of this is coming up with just some few days to John Mahama officially taking over as president. But I need to tell you that this is happening because the New Patriotic Party lost. So why did they lose? How did they lose? And how is that feeding into all these transition issues coming up? That's what we want to look at tonight here on PM Express. Be my guest. I am Blessed Sogah. And when we return, we'll talk first of all to the NDC's transition team, and then we'll begin to dissect and analyze what happened to the NPP and why they are exiting power. Stay with us. And as you stay on with us, don't forget that PM Express, as always, is brought to you by Syntex Tank. It is strong and it is tough as well. And Academic Times, Pepsodent Cavity Fighter toothpaste as well, is also on board with us tonight. The Academic Times Ghana is an incoming graphic and online publication aiming to collaborate with university authorities and students to ensure that student research is published in a summary form. And so be on the lookout for that space as well. Don't forget that in Ghana, you need to get ready for the biggest giveaway, which is about to happen. and that's been made possible by Syntex Tank. Syntex Tank is visiting some 15 communities and giving them free water. Yes, you heard it first on Joy News. This is to say, thank you, Ghana, for making Syntex Tank #1. So now if you're a community and you want to be a beneficiary of this free water, the Syntex Tank free water giveaway, all you need to do is to locate them on their social media handles. It's at Syntex Ghana, and nominate your community today, and you'd be on your way to benefiting from that great CSR coming through from friends at Syntex Tank. Pepsodent Cavity Fighter is also a product that you need to try because anytime we eat, we have some food particles just trapped between our teeth as well. So that's why you need the Pepsodent Cavity Fighter to support you through that process as well. And it's always a pleasure to have you on with us here on PM Express. Tonight, I'm sitting in for Evans Mensah. I'm Blessed Sogah. And of course, don't forget that we'll be examining why we're here today, the reason for which the New Patriotic Party has lost the elections. But while we're at that, we know that the transition is underway, a reason for which we brought to you some of the emerging concerns. So let's bring in now Felix Fosu-Kwache, who's the spokesperson of the incoming government's transition team. He addressed a news conference a while ago, and it's such a pleasure to be speaking to you, Felix, at this time when we know that all is getting set for John Dramani Mahama, the president-elect, to take over on January 7. But even before that begins, there are some concerns emerging. So let's first of all start off with today's exercise. What's your description of the interactions we're seeing, at least for the very first time now, publicly between the president-elect and President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo?
Well, thanks for the opportunity. Today's event transpired in a cordial atmosphere. There was mutual respect between the two teams, and everything moved smoothly. Of course, the president and the president-elect set the tone at the inauguration of the transition team and urged members of the teams to carry out their responsibilities in a manner that places the interests of Ghana first. So in that spirit, the proceedings for the day began. And it all started with a briefing by the Administrator General on where things stand in terms of the handover process. She indicated that the government side was ready with the handover notes. And, pardon me, and would make it available to the incoming team within the shortest possible time. Following on from that, in compliance with Section 4.1 of the Presidential Transition Act 2012, 3 subcommittees were established to facilitate the work of the team. The first committee was the inauguration subcommittee. As we all know, on the 7th of January, the president-elect must be sworn in at the ceremony. And therefore, this requires some significant planning, bearing in mind that it is a huge logistical operation involving multiple stakeholders and several agencies of state. There will be a lot of people attending the ceremony, including foreign dignitaries. And therefore, it is imperative that immediate preparations are carried out to ensure that this ceremony comes off. So that committee was established. The second committee was the Government Machinery Subcommittee, which is charged with the responsibility of arranging a handover to the new administration of the machinery of the civil service that includes ministries, departments, and agencies under them. This committee was also put in place. The third committee was the Presidency Subcommittee, which essentially has the duty to ensure an orderly transfer of all official assets and liabilities of the President, the Vice President, the ministries, ministers, deputy ministers, regional ministers, deputy regional ministers, and presidential staff to the new administration. So these 3 committees were set up. The Presidential Transition Act also makes provision for the setting up of any other committees as may be deemed necessary. And as and when that becomes necessary, I'm certain that those committees will be set up. So this went on smoothly, And these committees are expected to start work immediately to ensure that within a reasonable time frame, within the constraints of the time that we have between now and 7 January, this is done. So this especially is what transpired.
Right. And details from the initial statement received from the office of the president-elect pointed out clearly that the agreement between President Akufo-Addo and President John Dramani Mahama is simply the need for an early start of the transition. Would you say that that is shaping up really fast, and that looking at the volume of work on the table now, you'd be able to complete all of the activities before January 7th?
Well, this will not be the first time that a transition is taking place. It has happened many times. And over the years, significant experience has been gathered. So it will be odd if after all these years, we are stuck in slow motion and are unable to speed up the process leading up to the transition. So I am confident that given the preparedness exhibited by both teams today, things should speed up and we should have everything in order before January 7th. Otherwise, we will be letting down the people of this country.
And just when we all thought that this was going to be a smooth exercise, already there are concerns emerging from your camp. You're raising concerns, for instance, about some transfers or payments being made to some entities regarding an ECG contract. There are also issues about recruitment, but break it down for us, because many have been reading online when we published that red flag that you raised earlier about some of these emerging challenges. Exactly what are these concerns, and in what form or shape are they taking?
Well, there have been widespread reports of payments, of signing of contracts, of recruitment, and other such activity which have been done on the blind side of the incoming government. Now, this raises significant concern because most of these activities have substantial fiscal implications, which essentially means that it is the incoming government that will be saddled with the responsibility for bearing the financial costs of these activities. For that reason, it is only fair and proper that the inputs of the incoming administration is sought in the taking of some of these decisions. And this is a matter that is actually precedented. It has a precedent. Indeed, at the meeting today, a member of the NDC side of the transition team raised similar concerns that Mr. Osafo-Maafo raised in December of 2016 during the transition. Indeed, Mr. Osafo-Maafo actually wrote a letter to the then Chief of Staff, Mr. Junior Zebra, indicating that they thought that every single major decision that was to be taken must be taken with the full agreement and acceptance of the incoming government. So one would have thought that having set this precedent and having drawn attention to this, the NPP government would itself be minded in following suit so that they don't do things on the blind side of the incoming government. We have had evidence of recruitment in GRA, Bank of Ghana, and other places. There's evidence of an impending payment of over 240 million Ghana cedis to an entity by the Electricity Company of Ghana. Now, these are major payments that will have a fiscal impact on the incoming government. And for a country whose finances are in shambles and whose economy has been run down, such that we are unable to pay debt, it is important that these things are done with the buy-in and acceptance of the incoming government, so that no surprises are sprung on us when we take over power. Because when an entity like ECG doles out this substantial amount of money, it has the potential to create problems for the incoming government. And when you do recruitment, two things happen. It is the incoming government that will bear responsibility for paying those that you are recruiting. Also, it essentially amounts to imposing personnel on the incoming administration. For that reason, the incoming administration must be aware of these movements so that it factors them in its own plans when it takes over. But these things have been done without any input, without consultation, without recourse to the president-elect and his team. And we have only discovered them through the instrumentality of some public sector individuals who have drawn attention to these matters. So it created serious concern for us, and we raised it forcefully at today's meeting. The response of the Chief of Staff was that the matter be shelved, pending the reconvening of the Transition Committee's meeting on Friday. So the also suggested that in view of the critical nature of these matters, a subcommittee be set up to look into the matter so that consensus is reached and that we find common ground on how to proceed. But our position is that until such common ground is found, all these recruitments and payments and contracts should be put on hold so that we have sufficient time to carry out appropriate scrutiny.
And Felix, sorry for cutting through, but when you make that point, that's when you're being questioned on the legal remit within which the NDC's transition team is making that call. At the Transition Act, do you have any sort of grounding, legal remit within which you're making this call? Because the president is still president until January 7th.
That may be true, but there's something called sound judgment. There's fairness. Now, elections are held. A new government is about to take over. 3 weeks to that government taking over, you cannot take major decisions that bind that government, especially in financial terms. It was the same principle that guided the MPP's position in 2016. Why did Mr. Osafo write that letter to Honorable Julius Debra if he thought that there was something illegal about seeking the consent and inputs of the incoming administration? It is only fair that the government that is to take over within a short space of time is made aware of these matters, because its own program or these recruitments, these payments, and other activities must fit into that government's program. Because at the end of the day, when that government takes over, they will be responsible for managing the finances of this country. The last thing we want is for them to be saddled with something that they do not know about, so that they are ambushed with payments and other commitments that they may not have programmed. It is not for nothing that even appropriation and disbursements of public funds and the budgeting process only makes room for 3 months of expenditure for the incoming government. So in March, the incoming government would have to, as it were, present a new budget to cover that fiscal year. And even with that 3 month budget that is prepared, it is only statutory payments, that is commitments in terms of debt servicing and salaries and other payments that are strictly statutory or that have emergency implications that are allowed.
Right. So if the
no other payments are allowed, and the reason is simple, that the framers of our laws had in mind that the incoming government must have a say in the major decisions that are taken in the period preceding the time that they come into office.
I get it. Now, if the president decides to go ahead with the payment or to approve the payment, what then will happen?
Well, I think that reason would prevail, and the president and the MPP administration will find it necessary to put on hold these payments and recruitments pending further consultation and scrutiny by the NDC side. We reserve the right as a government when we take over to review these transactions and see whether they are in the national interest, so that the public purse is safeguarded, so that we are not blindsided and committed to things that may be injurious to the public finances.
I see. And Felix, it's been a long day for you, but one last thing before I let you go. We do know that as part of the functions, looking at the Transition Act, which I was just pointing out to earlier, the requirements on both sides will then have to deal with issues of payments of benefits, pensions, privileges, which is a core function of the transition team. President-elect, I should say, John Dramani Mahama, has made that categorical statement that ex-gratia will not be released. But it's part of the core functions of the Transition Act. Have you taken a stance on that as the NDC's side on the transition team?
Stance on that is quite clear. He has said that under his government, nobody who works under him should look forward to being paid ex-gratia. So it is binding on people who work under him At this moment, the government that is in place is not President Mahama's cabinet. One would have thought that they will find reason to side with President Mahama on this matter and demonstrate commitment to protecting the public purse and showing that the ruling class is prepared to make requisite sacrifices, especially in view of the state of our finances. But if they decide to go ahead with it, there's little that President Mahama can do, bearing in mind that the law would not permit him to stop the payment. But when he becomes president, anybody who serves under him cannot look forward to being paid ex-gratia. So that is
so you're going to release without any undue delay, as the law says?
No, that money,
right?
That money is ring-fenced. Often it is even released before the new government takes over. But if it were left to President Mahama alone, that money would not be paid, especially if the people who are to receive that money are people who serve under him. So that essentially is important. The promise he made relates to his own government.
You have an absolute majority, 2/3. You could, go by that, bypass the system.
But it is a constitutional issue. It is a constitution. Until the constitution is amended, that cannot be done. So at this stage, it is only moral suasion which we can use to compel President Akufo-Addo to stand down on the payment of ex-gratia. It is something that we in the NDC will support, given our position on the matter.
And will you be laying that before the transition team?
But of course, it was raised today at the meeting. It was raised today at the meeting. But the point I'm making is that President Mahama, at this moment, does not have the power to stop that payment. What he has the power to do is to stop it when his government has taken over and members of his government are leaving office in, say, 2028. That is when he can, as it were, enforce this commitment that he has made to the people of Ghana. Currently, the honors lies on President Akufo-Addo to lead by example and show that he has some sympathy and sensitivity towards the plight of the ordinary Ghanaian and stand down on the payment of ex-gratia. But I must place it on record, and we must be very clear that when President Mahama says he will not pay ex-gratia, it is in relation to his government, members of his government. At this stage, he does not have the power or the constitutional mandate to do so.
Right. And just deal with this for me in a minute as you go. The point about inventory of government assets, vehicles. We've seen a statement from the presidency, and perhaps we might put that on the screens right now, a clear directive signed by the Director of Communications at the presidency, pointing out clearly what ought to be done. The directive is that all government vehicles be submitted be returned by January 3, I believe, and you have excerpts of the statement on the screens now. Looking at this directive and juxtaposing that to what's happening across the country, where allegedly some NDC folk are protecting, as it stands now, state assets, as they're calling it. Would you say that this should put an end to some of the attacks on individuals and state installations?
That matter is a pure law and order issue.
Right.
It is the responsibility of the security agencies to ensure that anybody breaching the public peace or acting in a manner that undermines the peace and security of the state is dealt with. At this stage, the NDC is not in power. The most we can do is to urge our supporters, that is, if it is even proven that it is NDC supporters who are engaged in this act, to refrain from it. Beyond that, it is the duty of the police or any other organization whose help they may require to quell these acts of lawlessness. And President Mahama has been clear in his condemnation of these acts of lawlessness. It is surprising that those who have the power to act are not acting and are only lamenting. But as for the statement that nobody should take away a state asset, I think it is in order. It is in line with President Mahama's own position on this matter. He says when he becomes president, nobody who serves under him should dream of buying an auctioned vehicle. That is a vehicle used by the person before leaving office. That is simply not going to happen. It is gratifying to note that President Akufo-Addo has a similar position on the matter. One would have wished that he had a similar position on the matter of ex-gratia too. It would then have completed the loop. At this stage, we can only wait and see.
All right then, and of course you can tell from Felix's voice that it's been a long day for him. Go get some sleep. We're grateful for your time here on PM Express. Felix Ofosu-Kwakye, speaking on behalf of the NDC's transition team. But all of this is happening because the New Patriotic Party has lost the 2024 presidential and, I must say, authoritatively, the parliamentary elections as well. Let's bring in Professor Gachi, who's also joining us from the University of Cape Coast. We also have Professor Smart Sapon from KNUST and the Executive Director for Global Info Analytics, Musa Dankwa, joining the conversation. Prof, I just want to start off with you on the last bit of it, emerging issues surrounding some huge payments to an entity that is, I guess, the ECG has to pay. Is this a surprise to you, or you feel that the NDC ought to just allow that to pass for the payments to be made? Because possibly there could be an implication for the energy sector, which is already reeling under heavy debt.
Well, I think generally, as part of good governance practices, this transition period is actually a period for winding up. So if the debt in question is something that have been delivered on a contract and that those people deserve the amount to be paid to them, it's just a matter of explaining for the new team to understand how needful it is to pay that money. But if it sounds like even that money, it was not budgeted for by the entity, the contract was not regular, etc., then the payment of the money is actually illegal and should not be allowed to proceed. So you should look at it from the point of view is that the government is in a winding up. It ought not to take up activities that will have financial implication for the incoming government.
I see. Let's get to it because the aftermath of the 2024 presidential election is, putting up a very key issue about the economy. And that's why we're grateful that you're an economist, so you understand what's going on. Ahead of the elections, Global Info Analytics had predicted that the economy was on top of the key issues the electorates were concerned about. Looking at the outcome, first of all, are you surprised at what's happening, and what should be the expectation now, knowing that the transition team is in place and that on January 7, John Mahama takes over?
Well, I think the point has been made very clearly during the campaigning period that John Mahama will pursue a 24-hour economy. The implication of that is to focus on production and productivity of the Ghanaian economy, is to scale up the existing business capacity and also bring on board new businesses and also contribute to the growth of the economy and revenue in general, and actually make the Ghanaian economy a productive economy. I believe that is the essence, and that is what should be the focus of the government. And of course, the government needs to maintain the confidence that is reposed in it by ensuring that it starts with fiscal policy measures that will resonate very well with the people. In the NDC manifesto, we have seen what the government wants to do regarding the grant of exemption, linking exemption to job creation, technology transfer, and also having a means of measuring the delivery of institution or businesses that receive tax exemptions. So if those things start with if those implementations start from day one, then that will actually give some confidence to the people.
The key surprise element there is about how voluntary this exercise would be, because the president-elect John Mahama has spoken about that he wants the private sector to elect to be part of this exercise. Do they have an option, given what's happening to the Ghanaian economy?
I think the word voluntary was used in context.
Right.
If what is supposed to be done by the government is done, is motivating enough, the private sector will rally and participate in the 24-hour economy. The private sector is always galvanized, push forward to do things for the economy when they receive the needed incentives. So when the needed incentive is given, nobody will be forcing the private sector to participate in a 24-hour economy. So you cannot force anybody that implement 24-hour economy, but you can incentivize everybody to choose to participate in a 24-hour economy. That is the context of the word voluntary.
Indeed, a very interesting point there to note. Professor Gachi, just hold on for us, because Professor Smart Sapong made the projection that it was going in the favor of the New Patriotic Party, and that despite all of the challenges, the key campaign messaging and approach of the NPP would have worked. But what went wrong, Professor Smart Sapong? The fact that you had projected that the NPP's message was being received by the people of Ghana?
Well, good evening to your good self and our cherished viewers. So, two things, if you ask me. One, because as I said in my address earlier, the frequency of my expected study could not come on because I missed out on two different study periods due to the demise of my mother, which took most of my time in the year. So I got the opportunity to do one in October. I started in October 16th and terminated in November 16th. And that is what I reported. One may be because of time lapse between the time of the data collection and then the time of the elections. And we all agree that time plays a serious role in the outcomes of elections research. Then number two, I did a turnout effect model. And if you saw in my report, the condition for the outcomes I shared was hinged largely on turnout. The estimated turnout, 81.4%, was based on the trends that we have, and then the data that I took in respect of persons who were willing to vote as compared to 2022, and then the trend that we already have. So having chosen that baseline and then satisfying that, or the early voting confirming it, or the special voting confirming it, I was expecting that the main day will also pick the same estimated.
Yeah, but interestingly, you were heavy on the Ashanti region, for instance. And to be fair, it wasn't a bad deal for the NPP in terms of turnout, as being suggested. National average around 60%. But if you look at the Ashanti region, they're going a bit above the average, doing some 62% in terms of turnout. So it should have gone well in the favor of the NPP again. But that didn't, pull off the projection you were still making there. What happened?
I am yet to see the 60 you are talking about. What I saw was about 45 or 46% in Ashanti region. Anyway, I'm yet to see the final turnout. But what I know generally is that if we have a national turnout of 61 and an estimated turnout of 81, I mean, if the fall was a little around the estimated, maybe 78, 79, some +2, -2, still, I would have expected a very stable outcome compared to the model I chose. But following through the elections, once I realized turnout was falling drastically below what I ever envisaged or estimated, no model would be stable if the key variable, which is a turnout effect model, so the turnout, once the key variable is thrown overboard or becomes extremely volatile like we saw, it is
so what I'm deducing now from your point is that you still stand by that point, that if the NPP had crossed the 80% mark, perhaps in the Ashanti region or nationally speaking in terms of turnout, they would have won this election. So it was their loss.
Not NPP, the general interest of the voters. If we had gone up to, and I didn't say win, because of course as it goes up, it was going to go up for both the NPP and the NDC. So if you saw my prediction carefully, I said that as at that time, October 16th, Vice President Bawumia was in the lead, and that it will take the NDC and the NPP, they are the only two that are likely to win. And my recommendation was that they should work hard so they spare us of any option of a runoff. That was classically my conclusion.
Right. Great points
and it was
there.
hinged on the expected turnout.
Right.
Yes.
Let's hear from Musa Dankwa because he's been your colleague doing all of the polling during the electioneering period. And Musa, I do recall hosting you on X Spaces at 51 plus percentage point was your prediction for John Dramani Mahama, but he's gone way beyond the expectation even of some of his party supporters. Underestimation, exaggeration, what was really going on there?
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, yes.
Right. We didn't predict 51. We gave a base scenario of 52.2.
Yeah,
plus or minus
right.
1.8%.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
Yeah, and if you apply the margin of error, you have the upper ceiling of 54%. So we are no way off. At the moment, Mahama is doing about 5.6, so we are just 2 percentage points above where he was doing. If you look at the numbers that transpired so far, you could see that Alan Chinamartin and Beda collapsed in the polls, and their numbers went to Mahama. That's why Mahama is outperforming the predictions.
I see. Where we are now, you pointed out clearly that economy was top on the agenda for many Ghanaians who were then telling you at the time that they were going to vote for the NDC. Now it's happened. Break that aspect down for us. When the average Ghanaian talks about the economy, what's clearly the expectation? Because now your prediction is a reality. So what did they tell you in that survey?
No, they were telling us that the cost of living is very high. Their own personal economic condition in the last 12 months has gotten worse. And that their priority when it comes to voting is going to be the economy. So clearly, these were the reasons that drove John Mahama's performance in the poll. And if you talk to everybody, it's the economy, jobs, and education. And education largely is distance there. So if you look at the top two, it's jobs and education, and these two are interrelated. And clearly on those issues, those who were going to vote for, those who were concerned about jobs and economy, they preferred Mahama by far. That's why he won.
A bit of a digression just before we get back to the economy, but of course you were big on Okaikwe's Central, I believe, sticking out your neck for the NPP's candidate. Am I getting you right on that? Was that your projection? Because it was reported in the media that you were sticking your neck out for the NPP's candidate. Yeah, just clarify that for us so we understand, you know, what was going into the mathematics there.
I said that he was the safest MPP candidate in the Greater Accra region because he was getting about 25% support from the NDC. So his support was largely hinged on the support he's getting from the NDC base. Once the NDC base left him, and his own people didn't show up to vote, clearly he can't win. Okay,
so it wasn't an outright win for the candidate in terms of your projections then?
No, we were hopeful that he was going to win, but once the variable that he relied on to win did not materialize, and he wasn't the only one. There were about 4 or 5 MPs who were relying heavily on NDC support to stay up in the poll. One of them was Senya East, Hawa Kumsin. Another one was Tojaman. Then Ajay Mr. Kosa, Those guys lost their seat because the NDC managed to keep their people in line.
And with what's happening, looking at the parliamentary level, is that the extent of, you know, frustration about the Ghanaian economy? Because overwhelming majority for the NDC there, is that a reflection of how much pain or perhaps concern the average Ghanaian electorate had?
Clearly, when people are not, happy with the economy, they're not happy with the job situation, then they will have a down ballot effect. Once they vote against the candidate who is the presidential candidate, they will vote against his MPs. And that is why even some of the fine MPs in MP lost their seat. It wasn't because they didn't perform, it's because the sins of the father was meted on them.
I see. Musa Dankwa, thank you so much. I give the last word to you, Professor John Gachi, because the marching orders about the economy. What should be the priority now for John Mahama as he takes over on January 7th? Briefly for me as we wrap up.
The priority is to put the nation together, to give the nation a participatory, window through a national dialogue to discuss how we want the economy to move forward, to discuss how we want free SHS to move forward,
right,
how we are going to seek for a lasting funding solution for the free SHS. So
Right.
these are very critical things to involve people from day one.
Yeah.
In designing a new course of action for the economy.
And it's just the starting point. What a night it has been. Grateful to you, Professor John Gachi, for joining us. Also to Professor Smart Sapong and Musa Dankwa, Executive Director of the Global Info Analytics. But that's all we have for you here on PM Express. I am Blessed Sogah. We'll see you again. It's bye for now.
Thank you.